The fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped wasps inside the cramped confines of Jimmy's Quick Stop. A weathered convenience store perched on the edge of Harrow's Point. A storm-battered coastal town where the salty tang of the sea mingled uneasily with the stench of desperation. The warped wooden floor creaked under the weight of restless locals, fishermen with calloused hands, teenagers clutching warm soda cans, and a lone cashier counting nickels behind a bulletproof glass cage, when the glass door slammed open with a force that rattled the rusted bell overhead. In stormed Officer Derek Hensley, a wiry, hawk-faced man in his late 40s. His police uniform stretched taut over a frame coiled with menace. His pale blue eyes, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the dim haze, landing on a black woman standing near the back aisle, her slender fingers tracing the edge of a dusty soup can. She was Lena Carter, 38, her chestnut curls tucked beneath a faded baseball cap, her worn denim jacket blending her into the shadows of this nowhere town. To Derek, she was a trespasser in his world. A world he ruled with fists and a badge stained by years of unchecked power. His lips curled into a sneer, the kind born from a festering hatred he didn't bother to hide. As he barked, "What are you doing here?" His voice cut through the murmur of the store like a serrated blade, dripping with accusation, though he had no evidence. No reason beyond the venomous prejudice that fueled his every step. The air thickened with tension, the other patrons freezing mid-motion, their eyes darting between the officer and the woman he'd marked as prey. Lena didn't flinch. She set the can down with deliberate calm, her hazel eyes meeting his with a steadiness that belied the storm brewing beneath her surface. "Buying soup," she said, her tone flat but edged with defiance. Derek's smirk twisted into something feral. He wasn't used to pushback. Not here in Harrow's Point, where his word was law and his brutality a whispered legend. Without warning, he lunged, his meaty hand snatching her wrist and twisting it hard enough to make her gasp. Though she swallowed the sound before it could escape, the soup can clattered to the floor, rolling into a puddle of spilled cola, as he shoved her against a rickety shelf, canned goods toppling like dominoes in a chaotic symphony of tin and glass. "Suspicious activity," he growled, his breath hot with the sour reek of cheap whiskey. "That's what I see." The lie was flimsy. But Derek didn't need truth, he had power. And in this town, that was enough. He swung a fist, a brutal arc aimed at Lena's jaw. But she ducked with a grace that hinted at something more than instinct. The punch grazing her cheek and splitting the skin in a thin, crimson line. Blood trickled down her face, a stark contrast to her unshaken gaze. And the crowd gasped, a collective breath held hostage by fear and fascination. What Derek didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Lena Carter wasn't just a drifter passing through Harrow's Point. Beneath her unassuming exterior burned the fierce resolve of a woman forged in fire. She was Agent Lena Voss, a 38-year-old operative for the National Security Agency. A ghost in the intelligence world with a decade of covert missions etched into her bones. She wasn't here for soup or shelter. She was tracking a shadowy syndicate smuggling bioweapons through this forgotten port town. A conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of power and threatened thousands of lives. Her cover was meticulous, fake ID, fabricated backstory, even the faint limp she'd adopted to blend into the downtrodden locals. But Derek's racism had blindsided her, dragging her into a confrontation she couldn't afford. As he reared back for another blow, his knuckles whitening with intent, Lena's mind raced. She could disarm him in seconds, snap his wrist, drop him to his knees with a strike to the throat, but doing so would unravel her mission. Expose her to the syndicate's watchful eyes. Yet silence wasn't an option either. This wasn't just about her safety anymore. Across the store, a scrawny 15-year-old named Tyrese Brooks fumbled with his phone, his trembling fingers hitting record as he crouched behind a display of stale chips. His dark eyes, wide, with a mix of terror and defiance, caught every second of Derek's assault, the snarl on the officer's face, the blood on Lena's cheek, the crowd's stunned silence. Tyrese knew the risks. In Harrow's Point, snitching on cops could get you a beating, or worse, but he'd seen too many go down under Derek's boots. Too many stories buried beneath the waves that crashed against the town's crumbling pier. The shelves groaned as Derek slammed Lena against them again, his voice rising to a guttural roar. You think you can disrespect me? Her cap fell, revealing the sharp intelligence in her eyes. A flicker of something lethal that made Derek pause for a heartbeat, though he was too drunk on power to register it as danger. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the store's grimy windows, as if the sea itself sensed the reckoning brewing within these walls. Lena's pulse hammered, not from fear but from calculation. She could feel the weight of her concealed comms device in her jacket pocket. The encrypted line to her handler just a whisper away. But calling for backup now would blow everything. Derek's fist hovered, poised to strike again, and in that frozen second, Lena made her choice. She'd play the victim a little longer. Let him dig his own grave. I'm not resisting, she said, her voice low and deliberate, a taunt disguised as surrender. The words only enraged him further, his face purpling as he yanked her arm behind her back, forcing her to her knees. The cold linoleum bit into her skin, but her eyes darted to Tyrese. Locking onto his phone's tiny lens, she gave him the faintest nod, a silent plea, keep rolling. Derek's boot pressed into her back, pinning her down as he sneered to the crowd. See what happens when you don't know your place. The cashier flinched, the teenagers shrank back, but Tyrese held steady, his breath hitching as he captured the truth Derek thought he could bury. What the officer didn't see, what he couldn't fathom, was that Lena wasn't helpless. Her training screamed at her to fight, to snap his ankle with a twist of her hips. To end this farce in a heartbeat, but she held back, banking on Tyrese's footage to turn this brutality into a weapon. Beyond the store's flickering neon sign, the syndicate she hunted was moving, their deadly cargo inching closer to deployment, and every second she spent under Derek's heel was a second lost. Yet this wasn't just about her mission anymore, it was about the rot festering in Harrow's Point. A corruption so deep it stained the very air. Derek's racism had lit the match, but Lena's resolve, and Tyrese's courage, would fan it into a blaze. As he dragged her toward the door, handcuffs glinting in his grip, the storm outside swelled, thunder cracking like a gunshot over the restless sea. Lena stumbled deliberately, buying time, her mind already mapping the precinct's layout, the weak points in its security. The moment she'd strike back, Derek thought he'd won, his laughter echoing through the store. But he'd just stepped into a war he couldn't comprehend, a war where Lena Voss, battered but unbroken, held secrets that could topple empires. And Tyrese, with his shaky video, had just become her unlikely ally, the spark that could ignite a reckoning. The bell clanged again as Derek hauled her into the night, the crowd parting like a tide. But the real storm was only beginning, one that would drown this town's corruption in its own bitter waves. The air inside the Harrow's Point police station reeked of mildew and despair. A suffocating shroud that clung to the peeling gray walls and flickered under the stuttering fluorescent bulbs. Officer Derek Hensley shoved Lena Voss through the dented metal door, his thick fingers digging into her arm with a cruelty that seemed to feed his twisted glee. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, cold and unnecessarily tight, a petty flourish of dominance that made her jaw clench, but not from pain. No, Lena's fury simmered beneath her stoic mask, a volcanic pressure she could barely contain as this small-town tyrant paraded her past a cluster of officers who averted their eyes or smirked in silent complicity. Derek's voice boomed through the cramped bullpen, a grating crow of triumph. Caught this one stirring. Trouble at Jimmy's, resisted arrest. Assaulted me. The lie slithered out effortlessly. A polished performance from a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of bending truth to his will. In Harrow's Point, Derek wasn't just a cop, he was a legend of terror. A bully who'd risen through the ranks not by merit but by breaking anyone who dared cross him. 15 years ago, he'd beaten a dockworker bloody over a missing parking ticket, claiming public disturbance, and walked away with a slap on the wrist while the man lost his job and faded into the town's shadows. Last summer, he'd framed a teenage girl for theft after she mouthed off, planting a stolen watch in her bag. Her family still paid the fines in installments. Their savings gutted. Now, Derek strutted with the same untouchable arrogance, his scarred knuckles a testament to countless unpunished cruelties, his badge a shield for every sadistic whim. He slammed Lena into a chair in the interrogation room, the rusted metal screeching against the concrete floor, and leaned in close, his breath a rancid mix of tobacco and spite. "You're done, sweetheart," he hissed, his yellowed teeth bared in a grin that made her stomach churn, not from fear, but from the sheer injustice of it. Inside, Lena wrestled with a storm of her own. As an NSA agent, she'd faced assassins in Tehran, defused bombs in Bogotá, stared down death without blinking, but this petty despot's playground of power gnawed at her in a way no mission ever had. She could snap the cuffs in seconds, a trick honed from years of training, and have Derek's face smashed against the table before he could blink. Oh, how she ached to do it, to wipe that smug leer off his face. But every move risked her cover, risked the bioweapons syndicate slipping through her fingers, their deadly cargo vanishing into the night while she played prisoner to this thug. Her mission teetered on a knife's edge, and Derek's every taunt tightened the noose. She hated the helplessness. Hated that she had to swallow her pride and let this monster gloat. Hated that the system propped him up like a grotesque idol. He paced now, a predator savoring his catch, tossing her confiscated jacket onto the table with a theatrical sneer. "What's this, huh? Spy gear?" he mocked, oblivious to the comms device sewn into the lining. Inches from discovery, Lena's pulse spiked, but her face remained a blank slate. She couldn't let him stumble onto the truth. Not yet. Derek's past loomed over the room like a ghost. The whispers of a fisherman who'd disappeared after reporting Derek's shakedowns. The widow who'd lost her home when he trumped up a drug charge. Present merged with past as he yanked a baton from his belt, tapping it against his palm with a rhythm that promised violence. "You'll talk, or I'll make you," he growled, his eyes glinting with a hunger that turned her frustration into a white-hot rage she could taste. Lena's mind churned. Endure this farce and pray Tyrese's video surfaced. Or break free and risk everything? Derek raised the baton, his smirk widening, and in that moment, she saw not just a corrupt cop but a system rotting from the core. A beast she'd sworn to dismantle. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was a coiled spring. And when it snapped, Derek Hensley would learn the cost of his reign. The night swallowed Harrow's Point in a shroud of restless shadows, the wind howling off the churning sea as if mourning the secrets buried beneath its waves. Inside the police station's dank holding cell, Lena Voss sat motionless, her wrists still chafed from the handcuffs Derek Hensley had gleefully tightened hours before. Her mind racing like a caged panther plotting its escape. She'd heard the distant clang of the precinct's front door, the muffled curses of officers scrambling to respond to something. An uproar she couldn't yet see but could feel pulsing through the concrete walls. Outside, the spark she'd silently banked on had ignited into a wildfire. And it all began with Tyrese Brooks, a wiry 15-year-old with eyes too old for his years. Hidden behind a rusted dumpster just beyond Jimmy's quick stop, Tyrese had clutched his cracked phone, hands trembling as he recorded every brutal second of Derek's assault, Lena's blood-streaked cheek, the officer's snarling threats, the sickening thud of her body against the shelves. That shaky footage, a raw 7-minute testament to unchecked cruelty, was no longer just a video, it was a grenade. And Tyrese had pulled the pin. He'd bolted through the salt-crusted alleys, his sneakers pounding the cracked pavement, heart hammering with the weight of what he carried. Undeniable proof that could shred Derek's lies and expose the rot festering in Harrow's Point. Tyrese didn't trust the cops, how could he? After watching his uncle hauled off for loitering 3 years ago. Never to return? So he sought out his older sister, Zara Brooks, a 27-year-old bartender with a side gig writing for an underground news blog called The Tide's Edge. Her cramped apartment above the town's lone dive bar smelled of stale beer and ink. But it became a war room as Tyrese thrust the phone into her hands, his voice cracking with urgency. "You gotta see this. Zara, he's a monster." Zara's hazel eyes widened as the video played, her breath catching at the sight of Derek's baton hovering over Lena. The crowd's fearful silence a deafening accomplice. She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she'd uploaded the footage to her blog, tagging every rogue journalist and activist she knew, including Nia Kessler, a 34-year-old investigative firebrand whose podcast, Unveiled Truths, had toppled corrupt officials from Portland to Miami. Nia's voice, sharp and unrelenting, hit the airwaves by midnight, narrating the video to her 300,000 listeners. "This is Officer Derek Hensley, a predator in uniform. Beating an innocent woman in broad daylight. Listen close. Harrow's Point. Because this is your reckoning. The internet erupted. A digital tidal wave crashing over social media as the clip ricocheted from the tide's edge to Twitter, YouTube, and beyond, racking up 1 million views before dawn. In Harrow's Point, the reaction was seismic. Fishermen who'd whispered about Derek's shakedowns for years now gathered outside the rusty Anchor pub. Their weathered faces twisted with fury. Fists clenched around bottles as they roared. Enough is enough. Mothers like Ella Monroe, whose son had vanished after a routine stop 2 summers back, wept openly on the pier, clutching photos of their lost children as the video looped on their phones. Each frame a dagger of validation for their buried grief. By sunrise, the town square, a muddy patch ringed by sagging clapboard shops, swelled with hundreds. Their voices a raw, ragged chorus of outrage. No more silence. No more blood. Placards scrawled with "Justice for her" and "Burn the badge" bobbed above the crowd. The air thick with salt spray and the acrid smoke of burning tires. Tyrese stood among them, his skinny frame dwarfed by the throng. Tears streaking his face, not from fear, but from a piercing pride that his trembling hands had lit this fuse. Yet beneath the chaos lurked a mystery that tightened the knot in Lena's gut as she pieced together snatched fragments of office's chatter through the cell's bars. Chief's pissed. Someone's asking questions about the crates at the dock. The bioweapons syndicate she'd tracked for months, shadowy figures with code names like Reaper and Wraith, hadn't just chosen Harrow's Point for its isolation. They'd woven Derek into their web. A corrupt pawn guarding their shipments with brute force. Had he known who she was? Was his attack a random act of prejudice? Or a calculated strike to silence her? The uncertainty gnawed at her. Each unanswered question a splinter under her skin. She couldn't move until she knew. Couldn't risk the mission for a hunch. Back in the square, Zara climbed onto a crate, her voice cutting through the wind. This isn't just about one woman, it's about all of us. Every soul Derek's crushed. The crowd roared back, a primal scream that shook the gulls from their perches. But then came a gasp. A fisherman yanked his phone from his pocket, shouting, "They found something, down by the pier." A grainy livestream flickered across screens. A dockworker, emboldened by the protests, had pried open a locked crate stashed behind the harbormaster's shed, revealing vials of a murky green liquid glinting under flashlight beams. Whispers turned to cries, "Poison! They've been poisoning us," as panic and rage collided. The crowd surging toward the waterfront. A tidal wave of bodies demanding answers. Nia Kessler's voice crackled online again. Breathless. "This is bigger than Hensley. Someone's been using this town as a dumping ground. And he's the gatekeeper." Inside the station, Derek stormed past Lena's cell, his face a mask of sweat and fury, barking into a radio. "Shut it down, now." His panic betrayed him. He wasn't just a bully, he was a cog in a machine. And the gears were grinding to a halt. Lena's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile. Tyrese's video hadn't just exposed his brutality, it had cracked open a conspiracy she'd barely glimpsed. The cell door rattled as a rookie cop fumbled with keys, his eyes darting nervously. "Chief says move her, too many questions." Lena stayed silent, her mind a storm of strategy. Every shout from the crowd, every frantic order from Derek, was a thread she'd weave into her escape. Outside, the community's wrath peaked. A fisherman hurling a Molotov cocktail at the station's rusted gate. Flames licking the night as Ella Monroe fell to her knees, sobbing, "For my boy, for all of them." Tyrese gripped Zara's hand, his voice a whisper lost in the chaos. "Did I do this?" She squeezed back, tears glistening. "You gave us a voice." Ty. The mystery deepened as a black SUV screeched into the square. Tinted windows hiding its occupants. NSA? Syndicate? Something worse? And gunfire popped in the distance. Sharp and deliberate. Lena tensed, her instincts razor sharp. The video had unleashed a war, and she was its fulcrum. The crowd's chants grew fevered. Truth. Truth. A hymn of defiance that drowned out the sirens. But the question lingered, chilling and unanswered. What else lay buried in Harrow's Point, waiting to surface in the wake of Tyrese's truth? The Harrow's Point police station trembled under the weight of the chaos brewing outside. its cracked walls vibrating with the distant roar of an enraged crowd and the sharp crackle of gunfire piercing the salty night air. Inside a dank holding cell, Lena Voss sat shackled to a rusted metal bench, the handcuffs gouging her wrists with every subtle shift. A cruel reminder of Derek Hensley's spiteful grip. But Lena's face remained an unreadable mask, calm. Yes, but beneath it burned a furnace of resolve. Her mind a labyrinth of calculated moves and contingency plans honed over a decade with the NSA. The cell was a concrete tomb, barely 10 feet square, its single flickering bulb casting jagged shadows across the graffiti-scarred walls. The air heavy with mildew and the faint metallic tang of blood from past occupants. She'd heard the rookie cop's muttered orders to move her, felt the station's tension spike as Derek's bellowed commands grew frantic. Proof the video Tyrese had captured was unraveling his world. But Lena wasn't waiting for rescue, she never had. Her hazel eyes darted to the cuffs. Their lock, a standard issue she'd picked 100 times in training. And then to the bench's underside, where a sliver of exposed screw glinted faintly, a potential tool if she could reach it. Her fingers, nimble despite the restraints, brushed the inner lining of her jacket sleeve, feeling for the thin tungsten wire she'd sewn there months ago. A secret weapon as fine as a spider's thread but strong enough to cut steel. The station's chaos was her cover. Officers scrambled past the cell, their boots thudding like war drums, radios squawking about riots and crates at the dock, and Lena seized the moment. She twisted her wrist against the cuff, wincing as it tore her skin. But the pain was a distant echo to her focus. With a deft flick, she snagged the wire and looped it around the lock's keyhole, her movements precise as a surgeon's. The click of the mechanism yielding was a quiet triumph. But freedom was only step one. Getting out alive was the real fight. The cell door loomed, its hinges rusted but reinforced with a deadbolt. And, beyond it, the precinct buzzed with Derek's loyalists, armed and itching to crush the uprising threatening their reign. Lena's pulse thrummed, not from fear but from the razor-edge gamble she faced. Reveal her NSA identity now and risk the syndicate vanishing into the ether. Or stay silent and claw her way out, preserving her cover at the cost of her immediate safety. She chose the shadows, always had, her training demanded it. Slipping the wire back into her sleeve, she stood, her body coiling like a spring, and scanned the cell for more leverage. The vent overhead was a rusted grate, too small for most, but Lena was lean and limber. She'd squeezed through tighter in cobble, evading a sniper's nest with a broken rib. She dragged the bench beneath it, the screech of metal on concrete masked by a sudden explosion outside, likely the crowd's Molotov cocktails, and climbed up. Her bleeding wrists slick against the frame as she pried at the grate with the screw she'd twisted free. It gave with a groan, revealing a narrow duct coated in decades of grime, its walls slick with damp rot. The air inside was a choking blend of rust and mold. But Lena didn't hesitate. She hoisted herself up, her muscles screaming as she wriggled through, elbows scraping raw against jagged edges. Every inch was a battle, the duct bending under her weight, threatening to collapse and drop her into the station's bowels. But she pressed on, driven by the image of Derek's smug face. She'd bury him. Not just for her, but for every soul he'd broken in this forsaken town. Halfway through, a muffled shout below froze her. She's gone. Derek's voice, thick with rage, echoed up as boots pounded toward the cell. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Time was bleeding out. The duct forked ahead, one path angling toward the precinct's rear, the other a mystery, and Lena gambled on the former, shimmying faster as flashlight beams stabbed into the darkness below. She emerged into a storage closet, crashing onto a pile of dusty riot gear, the impact jarring her spine but not her focus. The door was locked from the outside, but she spotted a cracked window high on the wall, her exit. Grabbing a baton from the gear, she smashed the glass, the shards raining like ice as she hauled herself through, landing in a muddy alley behind the station. Sirens wailed, smoke curled from the square, and the black SUV she'd glimpsed earlier idled ominously at the alley's mouth, friend or foe. She couldn't tell. Lena crouched, breathless, her mind racing. She could vanish into the night, regroup with her handler, or storm back in, badge blazing, and demand justice now. Derek's crimes were exposed. The syndicate teetered, But her escape wasn't victory, it was a spark. She needed more power. More voices, to topple this corrupt empire once and for all. And that's where you come in. Listeners, if you want Lena Voss to rise from this alley not just as a survivor but as a force to reckon with, smash that like button. Give her the strength to march back into Harrow's Point. Confront Derek head-on, and drag every hidden truth into the light. Your support could tip the scales. Let's see justice burn brighter than the flames tearing through this town tonight. The Harrow's Point police station was a fortress of flickering shadows and unspoken sins. Its corridors echoing with the clatter of boots and the static hum of radios as the night outside erupted into chaos. Officer Milo Tanner, a lanky 29-year-old with sunken eyes and a perpetual hunch, stood just beyond the holding cell where Lena Voss had vanished minutes ago. His fingers trembling around a lukewarm coffee mug he hadn't sipped in hours. He'd seen it all unfold at Jimmy's quick stop, Derek's unprovoked fury. The way he'd slammed Lena against the shelves with a grin that twisted Milo's gut. The blood on her cheek that stained his silence. Milo had worn the badge for 6 years. A reluctant cog in Harrow's Point's rusted machine. Bound by a loyalty he'd never questioned until now. Not when Derek roughed up dockworkers for disrespect. Not when he'd planted evidence on a teenage runaway Milo knew was innocent. Not even when whispers of missing fishermen trailed Derek like a ghost. That loyalty was a chain, forged in the station's backroom poker games. And the chief's gruff assurances, we protect our own. But tonight, as Tyrese's video blazed across the town, Milo felt it snap. He'd stood frozen at the store. His voice locked in his throat by fear, of Derek's wrath. Of the system's retaliation. Of being cast out by the only family he'd known since his father drank himself to death a decade ago. Now, with Lena gone, her empty cell a gaping wound in Derek's control, Milo's betrayal began as a whisper in his chest. A gnawing guilt that clawed at him with every shout from the crowd outside. Justice. Truth. He'd glimpsed her eyes at Jimmy's. Steady and piercing. Not pleading but demanding he see, and he had. Though he'd buried it under a coward's excuse. I can't stop him. Derek stormed past now, his face a mottled red. Barking at a rookie. Find her, or I'll have your badge. Milo flinched, the coffee sloshing over his hand. Burning but unfelt, Derek's unraveling was a mirror to his own. For Lena, Milo's silence had been a blade in the dark. She'd counted on someone. Anyone, to step up, and his inaction had left her cuffed, bleeding, and alone, forcing her to claw her way out of that cell. She didn't know his name, but she'd felt his betrayal in the weight of his averted gaze. And it fueled her as she crouched in the alley. Her escape a fragile victory shadowed by distrust. How many more Milos hid behind badges? Complicit in the rot she'd sworn to uproot? For Derek, Milo's quiet rebellion was a crack in his empire. He'd always counted on his partner's meek nods. His muttered, yes sirs, to prop up his reign. But as the station buzzed with panicked officers, Milo slipped into the chief's office, heart pounding like a drumroll, and found the man hunched over a desk littered with complaint files, Derek's past sins. Buried until now. I saw it, Milo rasped, his voice breaking years of silence. At Jimmy's, he attacked her. No reason. Lied about the arrest. I've seen him do worse, plant drugs. Beat confessions out of kids. I'm done covering. The chief's jaw tightened, his eyes cold with the betrayal of a system disrupted. But Milo pressed on, tears stinging as he choked out. That woman, he could have killed her. And I just stood there. The confession was a purge. A personal reckoning that tore through his fear like lightning through a storm. And it landed like a bombshell. For Lena, it was a lifeline she didn't expect. Hours later, as she hid in the alley, a crackling NSA comms device relayed the news. One of theirs flipped, testimonies in. Her chest tightened, not with relief but with a bitter ache. Milo's courage came too late to spare her the duck's grime. The glass in her palms. But it was a spark she could wield. A crack in the wall of corruption she'd widen with her own hands. For Derek, it was a death knell. His roar of, traitor, echoed as federal agents stormed the station. Badges flashing, cuffs snapping around his wrists. He thrashed, spittle flying, his eyes locking onto Milo with a venom that promised retribution. You're dead to me. You spineless rat. But the betrayal cut deeper than rage. Milo had been his shadow. His yes man. And now that shadow turned Judas, stripping him of the invincibility he'd worn like armor. The precinct watched in stunned silence as Derek was dragged out, his kingdom crumbling, while Milo stood alone, shoulders squared but shaking, tears streaking his face, not for himself, but for the boy he'd failed 3 years ago. Beaten by Derek while Milo looked away. Outside, the crowd's chants swelled, truth, justice, and Lena, bruised and resolute, felt their echo in her bones. Milo's betrayal of the system was her gain. But it left a scar. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when even the good ones waited until the fire was lit to act. For Derek, it was the end. His power, built on fear and silence, dissolved in the face of one man's fragile, belated stand, leaving him a hollow shell, raging against a tide he could no longer control. The sky above Harrow's Point hung heavy with storm clouds, a brooding canopy that mirrored the tempest breaking loose below as the town's police station became a battleground of reckoning. Derek Hensley's capture unfolded like a thunderclap, shattering the brittle facade of his reign with a force that left the air crackling. It began in the precinct's cluttered bullpen, where he'd stormed back after barking feudal orders to quash the riot swelling outside, his face a mask of sweat-slicked fury. His scarred fists clenched as if he could still punch his way out of the chaos Tyrese's video had unleashed. The station was a hive of disarray, officers scrambling to barricade doors against the crowd's relentless pounding, their chants of justice, burn it down, seeping through the cracked windows like a war cry. Derek, oblivious to the noose tightening, snarled at a rookie, "Get the chief." Now, his voice a gravelly roar that once commanded fear but now trembled with desperation. Then came the sound that stopped him cold, the heavy thud of boots. Not his own men's hesitant shuffle, but a synchronized march echoing down the hall. Federal agents burst through the double doors. A dozen shadows in black tactical gear, their badges glinting like steel under the flickering fluorescence, their faces carved with grim purpose. Derek Hensley, the lead agent, barked. A broad-shouldered woman with a voice like a guillotine. "You're under arrest for assault, obstruction, and conspiracy." Time froze as Derek's eyes widened, the color draining from his ruddy cheeks. He'd always believed himself untouchable, a king in this rotting kingdom of Harrow's Point, shielded by a web of complicit cops and buried complaints. But Milo Tanner's testimony, delivered in a shaky, tear-streaked confession, had ripped that shield away, exposing not just Derek's brutality at Jimmy's quick stop, but a deeper rot. Years of shakedowns, evidence planting, and whispers of a deal with the bioweapons syndicate, trading silence for cash-stuffed envelopes slipped under dockside tables. The agents advanced, and Derek snapped, lunging for his desk drawer where a loaded Glock waited, a last-ditch grasp at power. He never reached it. 2 agents tackled him, slamming his bulk against the desk with a bone-rattling crunch. Papers scattering like ash as his roar morphed into a guttural howl. "You can't do this. I am this town." Handcuffs snapped shut, biting into his wrists with a satisfying click. And the room erupted. Officers who'd once laughed at his crude jokes now shrank back, their eyes darting in panic as the feds swept through like a scythe. Outside, the crowd roared louder, a tidal wave of voices, fishermen, mothers, teenagers, their rage cresting as they glimpsed Derek through the window. Dragged out like a rabid dog, his uniform torn, his arrogance replaced by wild-eyed terror. Lena Voss watched from the alley's edge, her breath fogging in the damp night air, her bruised hands still stinging from her escape. Derek's fall was her doing, catalyzed by her defiance and Tyrese's truth. But it wasn't enough, not yet. The feds didn't stop with him. Milo's words had cracked the dam. And now the flood poured out. Files long locked in the chief's safe, complaints of beatings, missing persons, hushed payoffs, spilled into the open. Each page a nail in the coffin of a corrupt system. By morning, 3 of Derek's inner circle were in cuffs, their careers torched. Officer Grady, who'd laughed as Derek framed a widow, Sergeant Polk, who'd lost evidence of a dockworker's murder, and Lieutenant Vossler, whose signature graced the syndicate's shipping logs. Suspensions rained down like ash. 5 more officers sidelined pending review, their protests drowned by the community's cries. The chief, A grizzled relic who'd turned a blind eye for decades. Resigned in disgrace. His office raided as dawn broke, revealing a hidden drawer stuffed with unmarked cash and coded ledgers linking Derek to the pier's deadly crates. Harrow's Point trembled as reform whispers became demands, protests swelled. Banners waving outside the station. "Clean the force," scrawled in red paint across the gates. Derek's capture was a spectacle. A villain unmasked. But it was only the beginning. The syndicate loomed, a shadow untouched. And Lena knew the real war waited. As he was shoved into a federal van, his bellows fading into the storm's howl. The crowd surged forward, some spitting at the vehicle, others weeping. Ella Monroe clutched her son's photo. Her sobs a raw hymn of vindication. "You can't hurt us anymore." Derek glared through the tinted glass. His empire dust. His betrayal by Milo a wound deeper than the cuffs, once his lapdog. Now his executioner. Lena's eyes narrowed. This was justice's first breath. But the system's roots ran deep. And she'd dig until they bled. What happens next, listeners? Will Lena chase the syndicate's puppet masters? Or will Derek claw back from his cage? Drop your guesses in the comments. Tell us how this storm ends. Or if it's just begun. The storm-battered streets of Harrow's Point pulsed with a restless energy as dawn broke, painting the sky in bruised hues of purple and gray. The seas roar a constant hymn of defiance against the town's crumbling edges. Tyrese Brooks, a wiry 15-year-old with a chipped front tooth and eyes that held too much for his years, stood trembling on a makeshift stage, an overturned fish crate, in the muddy town square. His sneakers soaked through from the night's chaos. His cracked phone, the unlikely weapon that had toppled Derek Hensley, rested heavy in his pocket. Its battery long dead but its legacy alive in the grainy video now seared into the town's soul. That 7-minute clip, shaky, raw, undeniable, had captured Derek's brutality against Lena Voss at Jimmy's quick stop, and Tyrese's choice to record it. Despite the icy fear that gripped him as he hid behind that dumpster, had sparked a fire no one could extinguish. He'd known the risks. Cops in Harrow's Point didn't take kindly to snitches. His cousin Jamal had gotten a busted lip just for asking questions about a raid 2 years back, but Tyrese couldn't unsee the blood on Lena's cheek. Couldn't unhear Derek's sneering threats. So he'd pressed record, hands shaking like leaves in a gale, and then ran, not to hide, but to his sister Zara, thrusting the truth into her hands with a whispered, "Do something, now." As the crowd swelled around him, hundreds strong, their faces etched with exhaustion and fury, Tyrese felt the weight of their eyes. Not as a burden, but as a call. Fishermen with salt-crusted beards clutched tire irons, their voices hoarse from chanting. Mothers like Ella Monroe, her son's faded photo pinned to her coat, wiped tears with trembling hands. Even kids younger than Tyrese waved signs scrawled with, "We see you," in dripping marker. His courage had lit a match in this forsaken place, and the flames were spreading. Zara climbed beside him, her voice cutting through the wind. "My brother didn't just film a cop, he filmed evil. And he didn't blink. That's power, our power." The crowd erupted, a raw, ragged roar that shook the gulls from the rooftops. And Tyrese's chest tightened, not with fear anymore, but with a fierce, aching pride. He'd grown up ducking Derek's shadow, once watched him smash a vendor's stall for back talk, heard the whimpers of a classmate dragged off for nothing, but that night at Jimmy's, something snapped. He'd seen Lena fight back, her calm defiance a quiet thunder, and it woke something in him. Evil didn't win unless you let it. As the feds hauled Derek away, Tyrese stood with the crowd, their cheers a tidal wave crashing against the station's gates. And Ella grabbed his hand, sobbing, "You gave us a voice. Boy, I thought my Davy was forgotten. But you made them see." Her tears soaked his sleeve, and Tyrese swallowed hard, his own eyes stinging. He hadn't just exposed Derek, he'd resurrected the ghosts of Harrow's Point. Every soul silenced by corruption now screaming through his lens. The square became a cathedral of resistance. Banners fluttering, Tyrese showed us how, and a kid no older than 10 thrust a megaphone into his hands, shouting, "Tell him, Ty." His voice cracked as he spoke, but it grew steady. "I was scared, still am, but I couldn't let him win. We can't let them win. We're stronger than they think." The crowd surged, a sea of fists raised high, and Tyrese felt their courage mirror his own. A current electric and unstoppable. Beyond the square, the ripple spread. Nia Kessler's podcast blared his story to thousands, calling him the kid who broke the dam. While Zara's blog post, "One Boy, One Phone, One Truth," went viral, shared by strangers who'd never set foot in Harrow's Point but felt his stand in their bones. For Lena, watching from the alley's edge, Tyrese was more than an ally. He was proof that ordinary hearts could topple giants. And it steeled her resolve. She'd fight the syndicate not just for duty, but for kids like him, who dared to stare evil down. The emotional tide hit hardest when old man Carter, a fisherman Derek had crippled years ago for refusing a bribe, limped forward, pressing a weathered hand to Tyrese's shoulder. "You're braver than I ever was. Son, don't stop." Tears spilled down Tyrese's cheeks then. Not from shame, but from a fire kindled deep. He wasn't just a symbol, he was a spark. And Harrow's Point was ablaze. Listeners, this is your fight too. Evil thrives in silence. But Tyrese showed us it crumbles when we stand. Feel that courage in you? It's real. Let it roar. Because if a 15-year-old can face down a monster with nothing but a phone, so can you. Take that strength, hold it tight, and let it drive you against the darkness, wherever it hides. The fog rolled in thick and silent over Harrow's Point, cloaking the jagged coastline in a veil of gray that muffled the sea's restless churn and cast the town in an ethereal haze, as if it teetered on the edge of a dream or a nightmare. Lena Voss stood at the rim of a deserted pier, her boots scuffing the splintered planks, the salt air stinging the cuts on her hands from her escape hours earlier. She'd come to this forsaken port town on an NSA mission, tracking a bioweapons syndicate whose cryptic codenames, Reaper, Wraith, Eclipse, haunted her encrypted briefings. Their deadly cargo a ticking clock she'd vowed to stop. But what began as a covert hunt had spiraled into something far stranger. A collision of fate that lit a fuse she hadn't meant to strike. Tyrese's video, 7 minutes of raw truth, hadn't just exposed Derek Hensley's brutality at Jimmy's Quick Stop. It had peeled back the town's skin, revealing a festering wound of corruption and secrets that stretched beyond the precinct's rusted gates. Now, as the federal van's taillights faded into the mist, carrying Derek to a cell he'd never rule again, Lena felt the ground shift beneath her, a tremor of something vast and unseen awakening. The crowd in the square hadn't dispersed, they'd grown, their chants of justice, truth, morphing into a low, rhythmic hum that pulsed through the fog like a heartbeat. Shadows moved among them, not just fishermen and mothers, but figures in hooded coats, their faces obscured, whispering in tight clusters, strangers who'd slipped into town under cover of night. Drawn by the video's viral echo. Who were they? Activists? Vigilantes? Or something darker? Tethered to the syndicate she hunted? Lena's instincts prickled. Her ordeal had cracked open more than a corrupt cop's reign. It had summoned forces she couldn't yet name. The pier creaked as she turned, glimpsing a flicker of light, a lantern, bobbing in the distance. Too deliberate to be random. Her comms device buzzed faintly in her pocket, its signal scrambled by the fog or something more sinister. And a cryptic message flickered across its cracked screen. The tide turns. Look to the crates. The dockworkers' discovery of those green glowing vials had ignited the protests. But now whispers circled, rumors of other crates, buried beneath the pier's rotting pilings, marked with symbols no one could decipher. Symbols that matched faint etchings she'd seen in a syndicate safehouse months ago. Was this why Derek had fought so hard to silence her? Had he known more than he let on? A pawn guarding a secret too big for his petty cruelty? The mystery deepened as Zara Brooks's blog exploded with new posts, photos of those hooded figures. Grainy footage of a black schooner anchored just beyond the breakwater, its silhouette a ghost against the horizon. "They're here because of us," Zara wrote, her words trembling with awe and dread. "Because Tyrese showed them we won't bow." The community's rage had fused with a strange hope. A movement swelling beyond Lena's grasp, fishermen scoured the docks for more clues. Kids spray-painted eclipse falls on walls, and Ella Monroe knelt by the water, praying over her son's photo as if the sea itself might answer. Lena's heart thudded, not from exhaustion but from a dawning realization. Her fight at Jimmy's, her blood on that linoleum, had been the spark, but this fire was burning its own path. She slipped toward the pier's edge, peering into the murk where that lantern had vanished, gone, or cloaked, and spotted a glint, a metal disc half buried in the sand, etched with a spiral and a single word: awaken. Her breath caught. It matched a pendant she'd confiscated from a syndicate courier in Lisbon. A relic tied to rumors of a cult-like network pulling the strings behind the bioweapons trade. Had her mission collided with something older, deeper? The crowd's hum grew louder. A chant weaving through the fog: we rise. We rise, and Tyrese's voice broke through. Small but fierce. They can't hide anymore. Lena's lips tightened. She'd ignited this. Yes, but it was no longer hers alone. The hooded figures melted into the mist as she approached the square. Their presence a riddle. Was this Justice's army? Or a new threat cloaking itself in the town's fury? A fisherman pressed a crumpled note into her hand. Meet at the old lighthouse. Midnight, and vanished before she could speak. Her ordeal had exposed Derek, toppled a corrupt system, but it had also summoned this, a movement teetering between salvation and shadow, mobilizing Harrow's Point into a force that defied her understanding. She clutched the disc, its edges biting her palm, and felt a shiver of purpose. One incident, her stand against evil, had unleashed a tide she couldn't control, a wave crashing against deep-seated horrors yet to surface. The fog thickened, swallowing the schooner's silhouette, and Lena knew, this wasn't the end, but a beginning, mysterious and unstoppable, a call to unravel truths that might save them all, or drown them in the dark. The dawn light filtered through the fog over Harrow's Point, casting a pale glow on the weathered pier where Lena Voss stood, her sharp hazel eyes scanning the horizon for the black schooner that had vanished into the mist hours ago. Her hands, still raw from her escape, gripped the mysterious metal disc she'd found, etched with a spiral and the word, awaken, a tangible clue in a puzzle that had spiraled far beyond her original NSA mission to dismantle a bioweapons syndicate. What began as a solitary hunt had become a collective uprising, a ripple effect proving that justice wasn't a lone endeavor but a tapestry woven from many threads: her skills, Tyrese's courage, Milo's betrayal of the system, and the town's raw, unyielding outrage. Lena's mind worked like a cipher, decoding the truths she sought with a precision honed by years of intelligence work. Step 1. The disc matched a pendant from a syndicate courier she'd intercepted in Lisbon, same spiral, same cryptic weight, linking Derek Hensley's corruption to a broader network. Step 2. The dockworkers' discovery of green glowing vials tied to the pier's buried crates wasn't random. The symbols on those crates, half glimpsed in Zara Brooks's blog photos, echoed the disc's design, suggesting the syndicate wasn't just smuggling weapons but guarding something ancient, ritualistic. Step 3. Derek's frantic orders before his arrest. Shut it down, hinted he'd been a gatekeeper, not a mastermind, paid to protect shipments he didn't fully understand. The logic snapped into place. Harrow's Point wasn't a backwater drop point, it was a nexus, chosen for its isolation and a police force rotten enough to turn a blind eye. But the truth demanded more than her deductions. It needed the pieces others brought to the table. Tyrese's video, that shaky lifeline of evidence, had captured Derek's brutality and sparked the fire. It's 7 minutes a key that unlocked the town's silence. Without it, Lena's escape would have been a whisper lost to the wind. Milo's testimony, raw and halting, had cracked the precinct open. His words about Derek's shakedowns, planted evidence, and dockside deals gave the feds a map to the corruption's roots. A map Lena now traced in her mind. The community's outrage fueled it all, hundreds strong. They'd flooded the square, their chants a battering ram against the station's gates, their hands prying open crates and their voices amplifying Zara's blog until the world listened. Lena crouched, sketching the spiral in the damp sand with a stick, her thoughts racing. If awaken was a call, who was it summoning? The hooded figures she'd glimpsed, silent, purposeful, weren't just protesters. Their coordinated movements and that crumpled note, meet at the old lighthouse. Midnight, suggested a faction within the movement, possibly tied to the schooner lurking offshore. She stood, brushing sand from her knees, and pieced it further. The syndicate's bioweapons were a front, a profitable mask for something deeper, a cult, a ritual, a power play coded in those symbols. Derek had been a pawn, Milo a reluctant witness. Tyrese a spark. But she was the decoder. The one to thread these truths into a weapon. The pier creaked as she paced. The fog lifting to reveal the town waking, fishermen hauling nets. Kids painting, truth wins, on walls. Ella Monroe praying by the water's edge. Each act was a ripple, building on the last, and Lena felt their weight settle into her resolve. Justice wasn't her burden alone, but a shared fight where every voice mattered. She slipped the disc into her pocket. Her comms device buzzing faintly, still scrambled. But a garbled NSA voice broke through. Agent Voss. Report, syndicates moving. Time was ticking, and the lighthouse loomed on the cliff ahead. Its cracked beacon a silent promise of answers. She'd meet the hooded figures. Not as a lone wolf but as part of this fragile alliance, Tyrese's evidence her shield. Milo's words her sword. The community's fury her armor. The truth was close. A tangle of corruption and mystery she'd unravel with them. Step by logical step. Confront the strangers. Decode the crate's purpose. Trace the schooner's path. But she needed more eyes. More hearts, to see this through. Listeners, this is where you come in. Harrow's Point teeters on the brink. And Lena can't chase these shadows alone. Tyrese showed us a phone can topple tyrants. Milo proved silence can break. And this town's rage lit the way. Follow the channel. Join us on this journey. Every subscriber strengthens our stand against the evil lurking here. Together, we'll decode the syndicate's endgame, unmask the figures in the fog, and demand justice with a roar that echoes beyond the sea. The ripple's growing, be part of it. And let's find the truth. Side by side. The fog lifted over Harrow's Point as the sun dipped low, bathing the weathered pier in a golden glow that softened the town's jagged edges. The sea whispering a gentle lullaby against the pilings. Lena Voss stood at the cliff's edge near the old lighthouse, her silhouette framed by the fading light. The metal disc, awakened, still warm in her pocket from the midnight meeting with the hooded figures, who'd revealed themselves not as syndicate enforcers but as rogue whistleblowers. Ex-agents like her, driven underground to expose a cult-like network behind the bioweapons trade. The crates were emptied, their vials seized by the feds, the schooner impounded offshore, and the conspiracy's tendrils, linking Derek Hensley to a shadowy eclipse order, severed by a joint NSA sting. Fueled by Milo Tanner's testimony and Tyrese Brooks's video, Lena's mission was complete, the syndicate crippled. Yet as she gazed at the town below, her chest ached with a bittersweet weight. She hadn't come to be a hero, only to stop a threat. But fate had chosen her as a spark, igniting a fire that now burned beyond her grasp. Tyrese stood nearby, his skinny frame dwarfed by the lighthouse's shadow, his eyes bright with a quiet strength she'd seen bloom since that night at Jimmy's Quick Stop. "You did it," he said, voice soft but firm, kicking a pebble into the surf. Lena shook her head, a faint smile breaking her stoic mask. "We did it, you, Milo, Zara, Ella, everyone. I just lit the match." She knelt, meeting his gaze, and pressed the disc into his palm, its spiral glinting like a promise. "This isn't mine to keep. You're the one who showed them courage isn't loud, it's steady. Keep it going." Tyrese, his fingers closed around it, trembling slightly, and tears welled in his eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of a legacy he hadn't sought. A torch passed from her scarred hands to his young ones. Below, the square buzzed with life. Fishermen rebuilt shattered stalls. Kids painted murals of fists breaking chains. And Ella Monroe planted a small cross by the pier, whispering, "Rest now, Davy," her sobs softening into peace. Lena's heart swelled. This wasn't just victory over Derek or the syndicate, it was a community reborn. A silenced people finding their roar through collective courage. She'd grown too, shedding the lone wolf armor she'd worn for a decade. Learning that justice wasn't a solo strike but a chorus of voices. Tyrese's shaky lens, Milo's broken silence, the town's defiant stand. That lesson hit her like a wave. Battles for truth choose their champions. Not always the strongest or loudest, but those who dare to act when the moment calls. As she rose, the wind carried the scent of salt and hope. And she thought of real life, how oppression festers in every corner. From small towns to cities. How systemic failure thrives until someone, anyone, stands up. Tyrese's courage mirrored kids facing bullies. Milo's reckoning echoed workers whistleblowing on corrupt bosses. And Harrow's Point was every community clawing back from despair. "We don't choose the fight," she murmured, half to Tyrese, half to herself. "But we can choose to finish it." He nodded, wiping his cheek, and said, "I won't let it die." Lena's smile widened. She saw in him the boy she'd once been. Hardened by a world that didn't care. Now softened by one that did. The humanistic truth sank deep. Change starts small. A single act, filming a wrong, speaking a truth, refusing to bow, but it grows when we pass it on. A legacy of defiance against evil. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over a town forever changed, Lena turned to leave, her NSA comms buzzing with a new mission. But her steps paused. She looked back at Tyrese, now joined by Zara and Milo, their silhouettes a quiet pact to keep fighting, and whispered, "You've got this." Listeners, this is where Harrow's Point stands, a testament to individual courage toppling systemic rot. A reminder that truth transforms when we defend it together. Reflect on this. Where in your life does silence hide a wrong? What spark can you ignite? Tyrese didn't plan to be a hero. Nor did Lena. But they chose to act. Will you? Like this video if it moved you. Drop a comment with your thoughts. How do you fight your battles? And follow the channel to catch the earliest stories of justice and grit. We're not done yet. Every tale here is a torch. And we pass it to you. Carry it. Contemplate it. And let it light your way.